Lenore Skenazy, thank you so much for taking the time and having a chat with us. So, as I understand it, tell me if I'm wrong. As I understand it, almost 20 years ago now, you were in Bloomingdale's and you allowed your 9-year-old son to take a subway home by himself.
Correct.
Right? What I'm curious about is during that time. So, I had my daughter probably a few years after that. So,
Okay.
there's a different, and I was living in San Francisco at the time. But what
Okay.
I'm curious about is what do you think your difference of parenting approach was at that time? Because there obviously weren't a lot of young children or 9-year-olds taking subways alone. So it felt weird and unexpected for some people. But at that time, what would you say is how you saw parenting different?
Well, I was a newspaper columnist, and the reason it came to anyone's attention is I wrote a newspaper column why I let my 9-year-old ride the subway alone. But years later, I was like looking through my archive of earlier columns, and I had columns that were quite similar. Like, I let my kids go to the bathroom by themselves at the movie theater, and I let my kids play in the courtyard by themselves in my courtyard because I just trusted them. I trusted strangers and I trusted the actual odds as opposed to going to the worst case scenario in my head. And so that was it. I think I was just strangely rationally wired, maybe, and trusting. And I don't think I was stupidly trusting because I spent my first half of my career as a newspaper reporter in New York at the New York Daily News, Superman's paper. And I would go around to every neighborhood and meet people and talk to them and get to know, I did a column where I would go to people's house, anyone who invited me over for dinner, and I would write about their food and their kids and their dog or their goldfish. And what I saw was, a tapestry of reality, and the vast majority of it was good. And so that's the world I was raising my kids in. My I'd say reporting based reality.
Yeah. And that's so interesting to me because Lenore, you were a reporter and so you got to see the rawness of humanity and you still had a sense of trust in raising your children and you were living in New York. So you'd think on paper you'd think okay, you're raising a child in New York, one of the busiest probably most dangerous cities say in this
Uh,
country.
Busiest, yes. Of the 25 largest cities, it's the least dangerous.
Right. But in people's minds,
Yeah, in
because of
people's minds. Yeah, that's why. So I
maybe,
was not living in the mind. I was living in reality.
yes.
That's the divide there.
Yeah, I love that so much. And then, so after this situation of your son
Yeah,
taking the subway home,
yeah.
then as a reporter, I'm sure it helped you launch into these conversations almost immediately, right? You were on the
Right.
daily, like
No, 2 day. Like as
two,
I
2 days later.
often recall, like so, the piece came out on I think it came out on like a Tuesday, and by Thursday I was on the Today Show, MSNBC, Fox News, and NPR, and it just
Right.
snowballed from there
Snowball.
because it was fun for people to talk about. I mean, there was a
Yeah.
a sort of obviously a salience for everyone who's ever been a kid, remembering what they did as
Mhm.
kids and how different that is from childhood today. And then I often this is one of the reasons I love New York. I mean, New York is so iconic
Mm,
that it was interesting to people to think about, oh, the New York subways, because everyone has seen them, even if 99% of people have not been to New York City, they've seen a movie set in New York. At some point, something terrible happens in the subway. But I, living in New York, I'm on the subway every day. I'm going to be on the subway in 2 hours from now. And it's fine. It's not beautiful. It's not totally clean. It gets you where you're going. I've met interesting people. There's bad
right.
musicians and good musicians. There's little rats and big rats. There's
Right.
people selling candy. I mean, it's just the panoply of New York that happens to be underground because that's how we get around.
Yeah. So you're bringing that kind of mindset to these conversations, right? And then, as I understand it, it snowballed, as you said, from there. And then you were named America's Worst Mom, quote, quote, right? And then you were in these situations where the interviews took a very different turn. So I'm curious about what really surprised you along this process or the unfolding of the weeks and months to come right after that. What was your biggest surprise in that process?
I guess the biggest surprise is that, at that point I was writing 2 columns a week and I've done so for decades and nobody cares about my other 3,522 columns, just this
Right.
one, just this one. And in fact, you can't catch lightning in a bottle again. It's like, say I had a great revelation about something else. People don't care. It's just happened to be the virality of that story. And I think it was because it wasn't an opinion, it was an experience. It was me putting
Mm.
my beloved child, blah, 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 on the subway. And so that made it, everybody could relate. Would they let their kid walk to school? Would they let their kid ride their bike around the neighborhood? Are their kid old enough to walk the dog? And so I guess what surprised me was the hugeness of the response. And then I think you were alluding to the fact that many of these conversations then went to a really dark place. And
Mm.
it was often the prelude. I don't know why I'm using such big words today. I feel like I'm studying for the SATs. The prelude, the idiosyncrasy, right? The paradigm shift that we're talking about, if there's a silent G, was that uh, the interviewers would say, yeah, it was fine. You had a great time. But what if it had been a disaster?
Mm.
And the what if it had been a disaster? What if he had been murdered and it was all your fault? Storyline always threw me off. And it still does to a certain extent. I was literally in, was I Argentina a month ago, and they lined up interviews for me. And both of the reporters said, well, it was nice, but what if he had been murdered? I was like, I can't believe it. This is the same
Right.
question I got like 20 years ago in America. So
Yeah.
what interested me is, why did we go from the real, which was fine, and
Mm.
happy and successful and independence giving and granting and rewarding, to the hypothetical, which was the
Mm.
worst possible scenario. And I have two reasons that I think that happened, and I'm not sure which one is right. And I'm not sure if there's another reason out there, but one is that they had to get the story back into controversial,
Mm.
terrible mom territory. So they didn't have a terrible mom story, so they turned it into well, it could have been a terrible mom story. And then the other one was that you're just supposed to, we're always being tutored. Like, why are we so much more afraid to let our kids do anything on their own than our parents were? I think it's because we've been tutored by a lot of conversations like the ones I was having with these interviewers, where you're you're supposed to think as negatively as possible
Mm.
and almost pre-experience the regret and the recriminations and the remorse and the outrageous sadness and hating yourself that you would feel if your child died, and
Mm.
then go through life always pre-experiencing that before you let your kid do anything, and therefore not letting your kid do anything. Because I keep wondering how to, I mean, I haven't been able to write this column. I want to write a column about, why do people say, I'd like to let my kid play outside, but I could never live with myself if they were snatched? Or I'd like to let my kid walk to school, but I could never live with myself if my mom didn't say that when she sent me off to walk to school. And my mom was a worrier. So how come
Mm.
today's worriers are more worried?
Yes. Yes. And so, yes, let's continue that journey then. So you went from all these interviews, these discussions through to creating a book. You wrote a book, Free Range Kids, right? And then it turned into a movement from there. You have a blog, and then it went from there. There's a chapter in here, speaking of what we are just speaking about,
Mhm.
the Be Worldly chapter that I'm particularly interested
Oh,
in.
yeah.
As a Canadian-born
I knew you were Canadian
British,
because you said process.
yeah, that's right, with British parents. My husband's Australian, so we've been here in America for almost 20 years, I'd say. So I'm curious about what you noticed about the culture here in America versus what you learned is happening in other cultures and how they sort of compare, because there's definitely a sense of fear that you brought up here in America.
Mhm,
And I'm
mhm.
curious, sort of, what are you seeing between America versus other countries in terms of raising resilient kids?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that much about other countries, but I do know we are sort of the capital of creating and exporting fear. And I feel
Mm.
like it's this virus that got out of the lab here in America to make parents afraid, and it's sort of spreading around the world. But you do hear about people like in Germany, for instance. The parents are told you cannot walk your child to school. What are you doing to them? And I don't know if it's an actual law or if it's just the norm. But the expectation is that your kid goes off to kindergarten, A, on their own feet, and B, that there will be some overnights that the kindergarten teacher, maybe pre-kindergarten teachers, take the kids on, and that you will say that's fine and you will let go. They're trying to build their playgrounds with more little risks built into them, not hazards, not dangers, but things that make you pay attention, like maybe the steps up to the slide are not exactly spaced 6 inches apart. It might be 3 inches and then 10 inches. And the reason for that is that this, at least in Berlin, the city pays the insurance. The city is responsible for insurance payouts. So if somebody gets hurt, then the city is on the hook. And so the city said too many young people, like young adults, were not looking down and were tripping and falling, and the city had to pay it out. Maybe it's they're not paying any attention anymore. They're so used to everything being smoothed out, literally and figuratively, for them on their way, so that this is not helping us as a culture or as a city or our coffers. So let's make them start paying more attention as they're growing up, so that as when they become adults, they'll be more attentive. So that was cool.
Mm.
And then, of course, you hear about all the forest schools in the Scandinavian countries where they really got it going on. And then many people have probably seen the Japanese show Old Enough, where kids age 3, 4, 5 are given errands. In fact, it's in Japan, it's called My First Errand, to walk and go get it's always something for sushi, go get the rice, go get the fish, go get the apron. And they do this often crying at first, or often with a little bit of trepidation. And then the audience doesn't say, oh, well, that's too much, don't push them. The audience goes, ah, as if that's an expectation that's just part of childhood. Of course, you'll be daunted at first, or of course, there might be a few tears, but that doesn't mean you're not capable or that we're not going to let you go. And then off the kid marches to the fish market or to the vegetable place. And then the joy when they come home. I mean, this show has been running for like 35 years in Japan, because everybody exults when the kid had a little trouble and they make it through. So yeah, other countries are more tolerant of the idea that childhood not only doesn't have to be perfect, shouldn't be perfect, and can't be perfect for the sake of the child.
Yeah. I do love that filter. Not
Mhm.
only like there's nothing wrong with the parenting here in the United States. I'm not saying that. There's no shame and blame. But what you're suggesting in a chapter is, what can we learn from other cultures and what can they learn from us? This kind of
What can they
reciprocity
learn from
of
us?
right. Yeah. Right. I love that. Another thing that I'm curious about when I was reading the book, I just kept thinking, we do live in a very, very safe area. So for us, it's very normal for our children to run into each other's houses. They
Oh, that's
ride
great.
bikes or walk
Oh,
to
great, great,
Dairy
great.
Queen, which is a couple miles away. So
Um, hmm.
that's sort of never been an issue. What shifted, probably before COVID, really COVID killed us in that regard. But I find that especially some of our neurodivergent children like my own, they just prefer to be indoors. So no matter how much I try to kick my kid outside, and also, a lot of our kids have activities, so there aren't always children. A lot of times there are, but not always are there children outside. My kiddo doesn't want to go outside alone. So if I flip the script, I kept thinking, "Oh yeah, I got this. I got you, Lenore. I'm on your team. I totally agree with all this, but I have a hard time getting my
Making it
child
happen. Yeah.
to take risks and ease her anxiety, and change her thinking. Have you worked or talked to interviews over the years specifically with families with or teachers with neurodivergent children who are kind of stuck in that way in their own anxiety?
Well, I guess the good news, bad news is that we're all stuck in that anxiety. You can be neurodivergent, you can be as non-divergent as you want. I mean, the Surgeon General did his whole report in 2021 saying that kids are more anxious and depressed than ever, and he wasn't specifying one slice of them. It was all. And then he did a report a couple of years later that parents are more depressed and stressed and anxious than ever. Because I do think, as my colleague John Haidt, who wrote the book The Anxious Generation, put it, it's an anxious generation. It's actually an anxious couple of generations, the parents and the kids. So let me address the idea of kids not being outside, and then we'll talk about kids being inside, and then we'll go from there. And then we'll talk about neurodivergence. Kids not being outside is not your imagination. There are studies that show that, it used to be the majority of kids walk to school. Now it's about 10%. And that there was one study by the Children in Nature Network that kids spend an average of 5 to 7 minutes outside a day in unstructured time. So it really has disappeared. For a while, I was thinking of it like Like we didn't know the rainforest was disappearing. And then finally we compared like an old picture of the rainforest to the new one. It's like, oh my God, this has been
Mm,
happening gradually. And so we didn't notice it disappearing. And now it's almost too late. I feel that way about kids being outside with free time. And so how do you recreate something that was natural that has disappeared? Well,
mm,
you have to do it in a man-made way, just like you would have to plant so many more trees or wildflowers where the wildflowers have disappeared. And the way, so Let Grow is the nonprofit that grew out of Free Range Kids, started by me and Jonathan Haidt and a man named Dan Schuckman, who used to be the chairman of FIRE, which fights for free speech, and Peter Gray, who you probably know very well, who wrote a book called Free to Learn. He's a psychology professor who studies the importance of mixed age free play. Anyway, so one of the things we suggest, two things for schools, and we have school programs, they're all free because that's where obviously the majority of kids are. So you can impact a whole culture by flipping a school. And one of the things we suggest is that the schools stay open for all ages together, free play. Okay, so you can have other programs after school. There could be some kids in violin and some kids in chess, but trust me, most kids want to be in free play. I would guess even the neurodivergent kids, because in places that I have seen kids playing, it's everyone together. It's kids who I didn't even realize there was this term, enclosed classrooms or something. There's a special word for like a classroom that is not the neurotypical. But they're out there, everybody's playing. One of the first play clubs I saw had these three girls. They were in fourth or fifth grade, and they were leading around a kindergarten and introducing her to everyone. Have you met this one, Mary? Mary, this is another kid. And I thought that was really sweet. And it was only later that I found out that Mary, the kid that they were taking around, was in a separate classroom. Maybe I guess
mhm.
we used to call them a special ed classroom. There's no way to tell. And then there was one kid at that same school who, was shifting back and forth, one foot to the other. And I was like, what do you like about Play Club? And he said, well, before Play Club, I didn't have any friends. And now, and it's like, that's not a that's a
Yeah.
life changer. That's so phenomenal. Kids desperately want to play. I don't care what kid you're talking about. And if they have a place that they know that they can go, that's loose, right? They don't have to play
Mm,
soccer if they don't want to. They don't have to participate in the jump roping if that makes them anxious or they hate it. But there will always be somebody who wants to kick around a ball or draw with chalk or just sit next to you on the swings and talk for a little while. And it's often not the kids that you know from your own grade. I mean, sometimes, like I remember how great it was going off to college. I was Lori growing up, and I'm Lenore as of there. Lenore's my real name. And it's like you get to be this other person. And at recess or at play club being longer and fewer rules, you get to expand into the person who you really want to be. And then you
mm,
can meet other people who haven't already decided you're the dumb one or the boring one or the teacher's pet, right? Because you're the third grader. Now you're talking to fifth grader who doesn't have all that baggage about you. So a Let Grow Play Club, all the materials are at letgrow.org, is just the simplest idea to give kids back, 80 or 85% of what they would be getting if they were just hanging out with the kids in the neighborhood at the local park. And there is an adult there, but they're like a lifeguard. They're not organizing games. They're not solving arguments. They're just there in case of emergencies.
yeah.
So that's what I would say about getting kids outside. And in terms of an idea that you can do at home, if your school doesn't immediately embrace this, which they should, is one mom wrote to us recently, and she'd actually started a play club at school. It's easier to start one if you volunteer to be the person in charge for free. But she also started something she called the Friendship Club in her neighborhood, which was that her son had like three friends, and all the moms agreed that like my kid can be at any of your houses at any time. I mean, not 2 a.m., but anytime after school or on the weekends. And if you're there and the kid isn't busy with something, then they can
Mhm.
play. It just made it got over the hump of like, I wonder what that other parent is going to say. I don't want to look like I'm imposing. I don't want my kid to be bothering them. This is a pact, like it's a friendship club. We're all friends. The kids can do
Yeah.
whatever they want together. So
Yeah.
that struck me as a sort of easy way for people to expand their kids' life. Peter Gray, aforementioned Peter Gray, always says that kids are not drawn outside by the fact that it's outdoors, the sun is shining, it's a beautiful day. They're drawn outside by friends. They see somebody outside that they want to be with, of course they'll go outside. And then I always say body outside tends to remain outside because there'll be fun things to do. And if they go inside, you'll be telling them to do their homework or wash their hands or let's watch this educational video together. And instead they're outside. So it's better. And I don't think we should be with them all the time because of those reasons. When you're with your kids, it's inevitable that A, you will see them doing something dumb or slightly risky or mean or slow or suboptimally in one way or another. And so you, being smart and mature and kind, will jump in and say, here, let's share our toys, or it's his turn now, or have you thought about putting your left foot on the left branch and then your right foot on the right branch? And it's like they don't need that, but we will provide that if we're with them. So the only solution is to not be with them. I am exhibit A, because when I'm with my kids, they're in their 20s, I still find myself, hey, did you think about, writing a thank you note to that interview?
Right.
Really, I mean, it just doesn't stop,
Right.
or at least I just don't stop. So you
Yeah.
can't be with them all the time, or you will always be intervening.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I love in the let grow. By the way, what a great initiative you've all created.
Oh,
I love
thanks.
the
I thought
homework.
you were going to say great name, and it's a horrible name. Everyone thought
Yeah.
it. Let them grow, let it go, let them, let's go, let grow.
You're right. I love the homework that you have there about go home and do something new with your parents' permission, but without your parents.
Yeah.
It's such a simple thing because I think I've heard you speak about how for years you had this movement, your free range parenting, and it was, talking to parents and or our educators, we get it, but it wasn't until you got people into action, right? It was that next step. And this,
Got
I think,
chills. Yes, you understood. Yeah.
yeah, I think this sounds like this, as I understand, this was like that first step is how do you make it so easy that people can't help but do it, right? How do you make it
Yeah.
so
So the
such a
way,
no-brainer?
right. So it is a no-brainer because it's homework. So A, we've taken
Mhm.
away the volition. Your kid must
Mhm.
do something new on their own. And then there's the social norms. I mean, right now the social
Mhm.
norm is, for instance, to everybody to wait with their kids at the bus stop in a lot of places. But if you say you have to let your kid do something new on their own, well, then the parents start talking amongst themselves and the kids talk amongst themselves. And they come up with really simple things. A lot of kids make scrambled eggs, I have to say, or they go to the store, or they walk to the bus stop, or they wait at the bus stop by themselves. And the thing that makes it so simple is that you don't have a choice and everyone else is doing it. I mean, Let Grow's
Mhm.
slogan is making it easy, normal, and legal for parents to step back, blah, blah, blah. So the easy is you're being pushed, and the normal is everyone else is doing it. And John, even in the anxious generation, keeps pointing out that a collective problem, both
Yeah.
phones and not letting your kids do anything on your own, needs a collective solution. If nobody gave their kids phones, then kids wouldn't want phones. If nobody gave their kids social media. But in this case, if everybody let their kids do more on their own, then everybody would let their kids do more on their own. And so we do it through the schools because, as Willie Sutton did with the banks, that's where the money is. This is where the kids are. And so it's really an easy way to shift the norms.
Yeah. Yeah. Interestingly, our superintendent had us read The Anxious Generation last year as a community, and we had
Yay.
a community get together, educators and parents to talk about the book. And one of the questions where, we were talking about mostly was phone, right? It was phone-free schools and really
Phones are a national obsession. I will grant you that.
yes, that's really where the conversation was going. And then when we broke out into sort of elementary, middle school, and high school, some of the questions were around, okay, great. So we understand the phone situation, but another thing that Jonathan Haidt talks about in the book is about this free play, exactly what you're discussing with the Let Grow. And
Mm-hmm.
as I understand it, you were a real hero to Jonathan Haidt, right? And so he approached you to create this organization, which is just amazing that you all came together and Dr. Peter Gray but what the question remained was, okay, great. So in middle school, they just don't have any breaks. I mean, hardly, it's like 10 minutes here,
Really?
10 minutes there, they go out, but it's not playtime as such as I understand it. They get outside for a little bit, but not a long time. And what the superintendent said, look, the reality is we decided decades ago that the focus was on the academics and national testing, and that was a choice we made. So it
Make a new
is what it
choice.
is,
No,
you
what,
know?
like, stop, make a new choice, right?
Right. And so I think, it's gonna be so I'm I'm tempted to also write to the superintendent and say, hey, can we next read Lenore's book, right? And
Yeah.
look at how do we take this to the next level? Because we talked a lot about collective action around the phones, but now that next step, and we live in a beautiful neighborhood. You know, there's lots of outdoor, like I said, it's safe. The biggest fear kids have are getting ticks, that they get Lyme disease,
I'm
you
scared of
know,
those too. And my
or
kid did have Lyme disease.
yes, yeah, which is not so fun,
It's
right? But
terrible, but also antibiotics. Yay.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
right. And then
so
mangy coyotes and things like that. That's about our biggest fear that we have.
mangy
But
coyotes.
yeah, but
Oh.
that idea of like, oh my gosh, we have a big job. It's one thing to do phone free, but how do you rejig an entire schedule, right? And you're talking about what I love about the Let Grow is you're talking about after school spaces, but how do we add more space during the school? That's very difficult, isn't it?
It is really difficult, and I feel like it's based on a, a bad assumption that was 20 or 30 years ago, which is that more academics means smarter, means more
Right.
successful, even means better test scores. Because it's obvious to me, but only because I've spent so much time with Peter Gray.
Hmm.
And so has Peter. I mean, so has John, which has also influenced John's thinking about why kids need free play. Kids are learning so much in free play. So many of the
Hmm.
skills, cognitive skills, executive functioning skills, and social emotional skills that we desperately wish they had, and that we have like worksheets for them to learn now in advisory, right? Okay,
Yes.
today we're learning empathy class. Empathy is when you care. It's like, no, empathy is when you're on a team and you realize the other side has too many 5-year-olds, and so you switch the kids out, or you throw the ball gently, or you let them win. I mean, empathy happens automatically when you have mixed age kids trying to do something together. The older kid scoops up the younger kid and brings him and helps him into the tree. You see this if you ever look at any videos of free play, which are kind of hard to find because free play is generally off without the parents. But there's a fantastic video. There's a great video of a Let Grow Play Club that you can find on YouTube, and I think on our Let Grow channel on YouTube. But there's also a fantastic video called Reimagining Recess, set in Ithaca, New York. And it was a recess that was given way more time than normal
Mm.
recesses. And also there's just a ton of junk outside. There's like old
Mm.
suitcases, and there's tree stumps, and there's cloth and ropes, and you just see how many things kids are doing and how many things they're doing together. It will make you weep. You know, boys,
Mm.
awful, evil, bored, you know, and bullying boys. No, they're like, one is helping another one to get into a tree, and one blonde boy is going up to the African American girl saying, "Can I have a ticket to your carnival?" And she's like, "Yeah, here's a ticket." I mean, it's like everybody interacting as if it's like nirvana. And then I'm sure there's some
Mm.
squabbles too, but you want kids to learn how to do that. And so if we could only see play through the eyes of somebody neutral, somebody who's not, you know, an academic in a way, and not maybe even a play enthusiast, just somebody watching, and you say like, what are these kids learning? Anything? And it's like, oh my God, look, there's cooperation. Oh, there's frustration tolerance. Oh my God, there's compromise. There's how to make a friend.
Mm.
It's so enriched that it is so surprising to me now that I've sort of been enlightened thanks to Peter, that it's hard to see. And it's almost our puritanical roots. It's like, well, they're having fun, they must not be learning, and they're learning, so they must not be having fun. And it's like, actually, you know, the human species has existed for, you know, about 1 million years, and it's been about 150 that we've had, you know, universal schooling, and it's been about 10 minutes since we said that, you know, SATs or bust.
Mm.
And it's a strange culture that we've created. It's contorted. It's like when women wore bustles or something. It's like, I know you think that's pretty, but in another 10 years, it's going to look really weird. And that's how I feel about the way our schools are run. We want them to be so smart that we are actually taking the engine of intelligence out of them, which is drive and curiosity and agency.
Yeah, I love it. This reminds me, I just spoke to Dr. Lisa Long, the author of Healthy Kids, Happy Kids. She's an
Mhm.
integrative pediatric pediatrician,
Something or other.
and she talks about how you get rid of sugar is to replace it by other things. So it's not that you're punishing them. So I see that sort of like we're taking away phones, right, as our sugar phones, whatever, as punishment, quotes. And then what are we adding instead? And this play thing really is that second piece that has to be added, right? Because I'm always thinking, how in the world do I get this phone off my child? But instead, it's always like, what's a better activity that's even more fun? As you say, what, they want to be with each other. So how do we, that mix has to happen, I feel like, now listening to what you're saying. It can't just be one or the other, right? It
Right.
has to be both at the same time.
Right. So one of our slogans, I was thinking slogans is take away the phone and open the door. Now, if you can open the door and
Mm,
there's nobody outside, open the door after school and let the kids hang out there together
yeah.
for this Let Grow Play Club. That's the idea. It really is. My new slogan for that is that it's a wildlife sanctuary for childhood, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the just like animals in the veld, they don't know that
Mm,
there's a, Nairobi is surrounding them. They just get to, roam free and, climb and eat.
mhm.
And same with kids. It's just a place where they can be kids.
Right. Lenore, would you even imagine we were having this conversation right now? Like if this was
So
20,
weird.
30, 40 years ago? I
No,
mean,
it's also
really, I feel
weird.
like everything is a circle, a cycle, right? Like as
I
if
hope
I grew up
so.
on a
I hope it's a
farm,
cycle, right? Let's
right?
hope it's going back. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up on the farm in the middle of Canada, but there was no other choice. I mean, we had dress up and Sesame Street, I think once a week for half an hour. That was it. Like that was the only television we had. And so of course we were outdoors. It wasn't something that we had to think about it. And now you think, oh my goodness, the fact that we're even thinking, okay, so we brought all this technology, we did all these great things, making our life faster, better, you know, uh,
Easier. Yeah, in some ways.
easier. And yet now we've kind of backed ourselves in a corner as such, you know? Yeah, it's
Yeah,
crazy.
I mean, I guess it's a first world problem. We can give
Mm,
so much to our kids that we end up giving them, stuff they don't need, including a lot of hours of
mm,
adult run activities that seem like, I mean, there was a Cornell study done about, I don't know, 5 or maybe 8 years ago that found that across the economic spectrum, across the race, across the geographic spectrum, everyone thought that the more adult run activities, the more enrichment activities you could give your kid, the better off they would be. And I'm not against some, I
yeah.
mean, we put our kids in some baseball and we had them taking music lessons, which got them nowhere and got me nowhere too when I was taking my music lessons as a kid. Um,
Right.
and yet that's balanced with some free self-directed time. And that's
Mm,
what's disappeared. And kids need it. What was I
yeah.
going to tell you? I was going to tell, I just finished last night and had to sob quietly because my husband had already fallen asleep. Where the Red Fern Grows. Have you ever heard of that book? It's a kid's book. Oh,
Yeah. Maybe I've heard of it. I don't know. I read it.
so good.
Oh.
It's so moving. And it's about a kid maybe from the ages of maybe 7 to about 12 who gets these two hunting dogs and goes hunting for raccoons. And every page is filled with a description of just him as a kid. Obviously an adult wrote this, what he sees in the woods and what he does with his dogs and things that he just does
Mm,
without thinking twice. Of course, I got the raccoon in the tree and then I had to go there and I had to saw down the tree and it was hard. It's like you chopped down a tree when you were a kid. And no mention of like we were so incredibly poor that we could barely survive. But you could tell that they were really poor because they needed the money from each of these raccoon skins to
mm,
to live. And you just think what an exciting life, what a meaningful life.
mm.
In some ways, a beautiful life, a love-filled life, a family-filled life. This kid had, and I won't tell you at the end, but it's like it wasn't he wasn't going to school every day. Let's put it that way.
Yes. Yeah. And what I'm hearing from you too is that, I don't hear from you this extremism that you're thinking we all should go live on a farm in the middle of
And
nowhere.
kill
And
raccoons,
right.
right? But
What
we
I'm hearing
should,
from you is
right?
is how do we create balance, right? How do we create
That's
balance
exactly what I'm writing
between
about. Yeah.
using tech in a healthy way, productive way, and how do we also have healthy habits that include being outside and playing together and learning these SEL? Because that's a hot topic for us in our education world is how do we add social emotional learning in an effective way? And we know, there's, I don't know, probably millions of dollars worth of SEL programs out there
50
that
million in Michigan alone.
Seriously, right? And
Seriously.
they're not always effective. So that's the conversations we're having with
Love
folks is
is when you care for someone else
right.
and they care. No, that's, love is when you're like, yay, I'm so happy to see my friend again.
Yes.
Let's go to the slide. So
Yes. Right.
it's
So you're
just,
talking about in practice, and you talk about this at the book. The last chapter is all about calling all educators, and you're talking about how do you put this into practice. So I find that really intriguing of, let's bring back social emotional learning in a authentic, real life, real people, especially in this world of AI and
yeah,
artificial
right,
life,
right,
right?
right,
Like,
right.
how do we bring back connection and
Yeah.
caring for each other, right?
I think it's funny you mentioned AI. I was just at the TED Talks and I was talking to somebody about like what happens when when kids all have this AI friend. They're like, you want to
Mm.
play ball? So will I. You want to, watch videos? So will I. And it's like you never have to learn how to deal with a real kid. It's like, that sounds boring. Let's do this instead. No, let's do this. All right, let's watch TV while standing on our heads.
Mm.
So if you leave, I mean, it's back to the wildlife sanctuary, right? No AI chatbots allowed. Kids with balls, right? Kids with chalk. That's it. Cardboard boxes. When I was working with John on the anxious generation, he let me help with his chapters on for families and for schools. And so I was just interviewing people like, what should a play club have? And one guy in England, Tim Gill, so smart, said, and make sure that there are sandbags on the playground. I was like, okay, why? They don't strike me as that interesting. And he said, because you need two kids to lift them,
Oh, excellent.
right? You
I
don't need a
love
chat
that.
bot, right? You need another kid and you have to say,
Mhm.
hey, come here, help me. Okay. And then you're automatically interacting, helping each other, making something happen. And it's
Yeah.
happening organically. So when you talk about SEL worksheets versus free play, it's sort of like
Mhm.
vitamin pills versus an apple,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Apples have been around a lot longer than the vitamin pills. They're delicious. Kids love them. Give them back an apple.
Yeah. And the pediatric therapist would say how great for the heavy work that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing, right? They're getting the input
Mm-hmm.
in their bodies. So
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of other
I've
benefits
just
there
got
too.
this great book. Hang on. I don't know if I can reach this. I got to take my headset out for a second to show you this book I just got. People are always, always, always sending me parenting books, and it sort of drives me nuts. But this one I started today, and I'm already underlining it all over the place. I'd never heard of the lady before. She starts out with such a phenomenal analogy about trees that grow in the wild and how, yes, you're an oak tree or yes, you're an elm tree, but depending on the wind and depending on the snowfall, you grow thicker branches if you're going to have a heavy snowfall, and you grow, your roots get deeper if you're being buffeted by the wind so that you don't get, uprooted. And when you grow trees in a greenhouse, which people do, the advice everybody gives each other is make sure they get outdoor time for them to be healthy,
Mm.
because without the wind and without the elements, without dealing with real life and always being in this perfect environment that some human has created for you, the tree kids, huh? No, I mean trees wither, right? They're droopier, they rot.
Mm.
And so she's just a really good writer. How have I never heard of her before? Um, saying that movement, even for a tree, is extraordinarily important to their growth, their development, and their sturdiness. And we are living in a radically sedentary time. Kids are
Yeah.
living through a radically sedentary experiment. Nobody has ever been this still. I mean, as adults, of course, but as children, ever before. So free play turns out to be even more important than we thought.
And that book was called Grow Wild, wasn't it?
Real
And what is
wild.
the
Yeah.
author's name?
The lady's name is Katie, Katy Bowman, and she says best-selling author of Move Your DNA, which I hadn't heard of. Had you?
Great. Awesome.
Move Your DNA?
No,
Had you? Okay.
no. So you travel around, right? You
Yes.
do a lot of speaking, do a lot
Yes.
of writing. What's I'm curious, what's on your mind right now, Lenore? Like what keeps you up at night? What's the fire in your belly? You've been doing this work for so long.
So long. Right. So right now, I feel like my new interest is already like receding in terms of other people's interests because of AI is taking over. But I'm very interested in and would love to hear more from kids about growing up under constant surveillance through, whether it's
Mm,
Life 360 or Find My iPhone, or all the things in schools that are
mm,
constantly sending home reports on kids. I mean, when they're really little, the preschools are sending home reports on how often they peed and what second they peed at, 12:02 a.m. p.m., I guess. And then, whether they got a B- on the Spanish quiz or a B+, and what they ate at lunch and how their behavior was sitting on the rug. And then did they get on the bus, and how come they're still at the bus stop and not walking home? I guess I'll call them. Oh, they're not picking up. Then I'll press the special button on the Gizmo watch and I can listen in on what they're
mm,
doing, because that's my right as a parent. And that kind of demands of the
mm,
parent is driving the parent nuts, because it's implying that every second that you're not in touch with your kid and knowing exactly what they're doing, seeing, eating, reading, talking to, they're in danger without your input or without your supervision. And I don't know what it's doing to kids. From what I hear, sometimes I think nothing. They're just growing up. It's sort of like, of course, I'm going to grow up not knowing how to hunt and skin my own raccoon, unlike the red fern kid.
right.
Um, but I have to imagine that it is shifting the parent-child relationship, because it leaves so much more to the parent and so much less to the kid.
Mm,
And also you want your parents to really trust you, and you want to earn their trust and then have that be what gives them confidence in you, not the tracking. And
mm,
it's unnecessary to trust your kid if you can always see where they are. That really interests me, and it doesn't seem to interest anyone else. So if it interests
mm,
you and you've thought about it or written about it or can tell me
mm.
stories from your own life, please write Lenore at letgrow.org. I am really interested and not getting any information on this other than my mind.
Right. That's interesting because I would say it would be the opposite for us. We want our child to be independent, and she she's the opposite. If she comes home and we don't answer the door, she can get to the garage, but she loses it. Or if she has to wait a few minutes and we haven't picked her up, she loses it. So,
Well, I think
yeah, it's
that's
really
part of
interesting.
the conditioning that happens. I mean, like, if you didn't have a way for her to know when you were coming, or
Yes.
for her to tell you I'm waiting, of
Yeah.
course there would be inevitable gaps when, oh, you thought she was getting out later today, and so you didn't pick her up for
Yeah.
half an hour or whatever, and then she had to,
Right.
you know, kick a pebble or find a public phone. And so I feel like we're doing our kids so little, we're doing our kids a disservice by
Mm,
being automatically available to them,
mm,
either by text or by phone or by tracking, so that they never have to um, roll with any punches, in a
yeah.
way. And if you don't roll with any punches, you think, ow, with a punch, as opposed
Mm,
to, oh, I've learned how to roll. So these labor saving, worry saving devices are the opposite. They actually create
mm,
worry. They create demands and expectations that are hard for anyone to live up to and unnecessary for anyone to live up to.
yeah. Yeah. It's like being, especially as well as us parents, like, and working from home. We are doing as parents, we're working and can be reachable 24/7
Yeah,
also.
that's true. No, I
So,
was like, my husband's like, let's watch TV last night. I'm like, I can't. I'm writing, as
yeah.
if, the 27th email of the evening matters that much. It's like,
Right,
thanks
right,
for
right,
writing to
right.
me.
Yeah. Oh, you've been so generous with your time, Lenore. As a
Oh,
parting, gift to our community, what's
uh-oh.
sort of the one thing where, families or educators can start? Because there's so much wealth of information in your book and
Mhm,
on the Let Grow website. What's
mhm.
the one thing to get started?
I would ask educators to consider doing the Let Grow experience,
Mm,
because it is so simple. And as I said, it's free. And you just send the kids home. You will be so excited to see all the different things that they can do and hear about their real lives. Oh, you learned how to make a tortilla? Who taught you? Oh, your grandmother. Do you live with a grandmother? It's just a way of sort of blowing open the walls of the school, so that the kids get to show you what they can do and you get to see into their lives. The parents are proud. Look, my kid made a tortilla. My kid painted her room. My kid learned how to ride a bike. And so why not try that? Like I said, it's free. It doesn't take much class time, and it can transform an entire community.
Yeah. And I love that collective action piece coming from the school is that if everybody has the homework, everyone has to do it. Because I tried it with my daughter the other day because I thought,
Uh-huh.
well, I'm talking to you.
Yeah,
I'm going to try it. And
good.
she, of course, laughed at me. She's, a typical tween. But I said, look, you did do something new. You hosted a sleepover and I had her make a plan because I didn't really want all these children in my house over the weekend. But she made a plan and she drew a picture and she did, here's who's coming and what are we going to do and how we're going to do. I said, well, that's something new. And so, it happened before I mentioned to her something new. But in any case, I think the difference there of coming from school is that collective piece really makes a difference.
But that's so great about running a whole, I mean, like that's a project. She project managed, and that's executive function. First, I have to invite everybody, and I also have to figure out what they're going to do when they're here. And what if nobody wants to play that? Then we got to do something else. I mean, that's phenomenal. The one thing I forgot to add is that the one of the terrible things about our culture today is that because we're always with our kids and we're told, don't let them do something on their own, we are deprived of the exultation of seeing them do something on their own and feeling that pride and like, look at my kid blossoming, right? So why is parenting a drag? Because we're always with them. It's like
Oh my gosh, right?
growth happens when you're not watching, right? You don't see your kid getting taller and taller, but you take them to your grandmother's house and you haven't seen her in 6 months. It's like, oh my God. So we
Yeah.
can't be watching all the time if we want to enjoy the growth.
Yeah. I love that so much. Thank you so much. You just keep on keeping on, Lenore.
That's all I can do,
It's
right?
such
That's
amazing
why I'm
work. I
drinking my
so appreciate
coffee, right?
you. So appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And hello to your viewers, and thank you for listening.